Hello, everyone.
And we are live with the three very respectful, very mature gentlemen participating in the 60-day novel challenge.
Wait, who's here?
Yeah. Who
Hello,
replaced
everyone.
those
Thank
other
you for
guys?
joining us. There's
Right.
always shenanigans going on behind the scenes when we boot this up. So
Always
it's always a
shenanigans.
good time. We always start with a smile, which is nice. All right. Well, everyone, welcome to the final 60-day novel challenge live show, where we are just honestly finishing it all up, wrapping it all up, getting ready for whatever comes next, and reflecting on how the past 60-ish days have been. Maybe 60 once we get a couple more days into the month. But yeah, feel free to say hi in the chat there. Let us know how your 60-day novel challenge has been going, how your NaNoWriMo has been going, how those words are flowing. On stage with me, as always, we have the great Hank Garner and the awesome Josh Hayes, and myself, the I don't know, like 75% Doug Lansford. That's a solid B, right? Keeping it humble.
You know,
That's not like us.
All right, gentlemen, we're gonna dive right into it. I told everyone beforehand that I wrote up a couple of questions, but I wasn't going to let anyone see them, so I can just get some honest reactions here. And I just want to know, first of all, how are the 60-day challenge books going for you both? We'll start with Hank because he cracked his fingers.
Yeah, go ahead, Hank.
I hit 50K yesterday. Ooh,
That's excellent.
Well,
sure
I'm going to
did.
give you the requisite keystroke medium golf clap of approval, which I have not done in many, many years. So be grateful and honored for that.
I actually
It's an
hit,
inside joke from years ago. I'm sorry.
I get that joke. I get that joke. I actually hit 50K the night before, but I posted those words in my story notes so that it would not count in my manuscript count, so that I could do it yesterday and then film it, because I was doing it on my phone and it wouldn't have been good for
Wouldn't have been as
filming.
fun.
So I pasted that in my manuscript, and then did a screen capture of the screen fireworks and all that good stuff. So
Yeah, excellent.
yeah,
Great job, Hank.
yeah.
Josh, what about you? I know you've had a couple big days, or at least a big day of writing.
Yeah, no, I actually want to say that Hank sent me his awesome video thing for hitting 50,000 words, and I'm watching these words kind of populate on the screen, and I couldn't help but thinking, I didn't know Hank was a pecker. Because I mean, he must have been typing like 8 words an hour. Like
I was doing that to wait for the animation to catch, and I don't know what the actual apparently when you're and this is something I need to ask Jacob about, but when you're in the flow of typing, it won't trigger that, but it waits for you to stop typing, and there's a certain amount of delay, and I don't know what it is, but I was going slow, waiting for the delay to catch up, and then boom. Yeah, so that's
Nice.
why I was slow typing.
I
Busted.
actually got 2 congratulatory little bubbles the other day
Nice.
because I hit the set word goal that I had I guess entered in. But then I also hit the calculated goal. So it gave me one when I hit 2000 and then one when I hit the calculated goal. Yesterday I had a phenomenal day. I haven't hit 50K yet. But there's still 4 more days? Yeah,
Yeah,
4
you
more
still have
days.
time.
There's still 4 more days. Yesterday I think I've mentioned this before. I calculate gross and net words on a daily basis, and so yesterday I grossed a little over 10,100 words and netted about 8,300 words yesterday.
Incredible.
And
How long did that take?
pretty much all day. I had some work, some Athon work I had to do in the morning, and then I just basically sat and worked on it all day. And then I had to stop and take the kid to basketball practice. And when I was there, I wrote another probably 1,600 words in the hour that I was there. And then when I came home, I looked at everything and I was like, oh man, I can't believe this. I wrote like 8,000 words and I got like 6,400 like on the project and all of that. And I was like feeling great. And then everybody went to bed and I came downstairs and sat down and meant to only type like a couple of sentences and ended up typing another couple thousand words. So
I love it
it
when
was,
that happens.
yeah, it was great. Today, actually, I had planned on, well, I still am going to, but I planned on trying to get up to, as I'm sitting at almost 36,000 right now, and I
Nice.
plan to get to 40 before the show. Um, but I thought the show was yesterday, and or not yesterday, I thought it was tomorrow. And so like I was like, oh yeah, I can get 5 or 6 more today, I can get 5 or 6 more tomorrow, and then I'll be like right there. Um and then Hank sent me the link and I'm like, oh crap, it's today. But I should be able to hit the 50,000 by Friday. I should be able to do it. Yesterday the words were flowing, and I kind of took a I kind of went a different route than I normally go, and probably going to keep using this method. And this is interesting, and this is maybe a little writer insight for the people that are just now starting or have only got a couple of books under their belt. I've been doing this professionally since 2017. And my process is complete. It's always changing, and I'm always adapting to things.
Same.
And one of the things yeah. So one of the things I noticed in writing Weaponized last year was that when I went back and looked, I mentioned this before, that there was a lot of stuff that was wrong. There's some plot holes, some things that were out of order. I had to rewrite a whole bunch of stuff. But all of that was like basically finished second draft manuscript that I had to go back and change. And so what I did yesterday was that I had an idea for this sequence that I wanted to write. I didn't know exactly how I wanted to do it. But basically, I just started like shorthanding everything. I wasn't doing any punctuation. I wasn't doing any paragraphs. There's no color. There's nothing. It's like a shorthanded what do they call it? Vomiting on the page. And I got through a sequence that I had originally envisioned to be one chapter, but it's probably going to be 3 or 4, especially when I get everything kind of lined out and colored in, if you will. But I was able to just completely smash through this group of scenes and the sequence that I wanted to do. And I was able to see some things that I needed to fix, but was happy that I hadn't spent the time to make it look right, that I was just like throwing it all down, because that meant that like a couple of the sequences I had some characters do some things and I was like, this doesn't line up, this doesn't work. And so I had to switch some things around. But instead of having, 5, 6, 7, 8 paragraphs of action narrative to scrap, now I only have like 3 lines of stuff that I have to scrap and rework. And so it's almost like kind of an outline, but not. It's extreme. It's like extreme in-depth outlining, like really fast, and then going back and filling it in. Hank, it's like the onion method almost, where you're going through and just putting the bare bones in. And
I'm so glad that you described this, because this is the first year that I've done the way that I'm doing now, and in that I laid out my 30 chapters, and 30 was an arbitrary number because there were 30 days in this challenge. So I thought I can work on a chapter a day. Completely arbitrary. It actually worked out, but I've never been good at predicting chapters, and I don't know. There's some black magic to that. But anyway, as an arbitrary number, picked 30 chapters and worked out my outline based on those 30 chapters. And every day I've worked on a chapter. And instead of focusing on writing from word 1 to word 50,000 and being, 60, 70% through with the book, and having that remaining 30,000 words at the end that I still had to get to, I've thought of it as I'm going to write 50,000 words of a rough first draft or a very detailed outline, like you said, Josh. So now I have a representation of every chapter in the book, and I have a
Yep.
complete story told from beginning to end in
Yep.
50,000 words. It's obviously not the full book that it's going to be, but it's a full story. And now I can
Right.
go back and I can onion through that, and I can beef it up, and I can add. And I don't think I have any superfluous words that I need to trim out. I think I'm at the point where I just need to go in and beef up as I go. Now, there'll obviously be stuff that I trim, and there'll be things that I would rather tell a different way. You know, that's all part of the editing process. But I really, really like this way of going through it and writing a first draft and a skeleton of a first draft. But the complete story is told now. Now I can go through and just add layers of texture and you know, description and more dialogue and stuff like that. But the whole story is told. Like, now I don't have this, because in years past I would be at the end of Nano or whatever challenge that I'd given myself. And then, okay, I completed that. Now I still have this much of the book left to write. And it always felt like you could run out of steam, and the, you know, it could come off the rails at any time because you just white knuckled through 50,000 words. But this way, like, the story's told. So I don't feel like a sense of incomplete, or like I succeeded in writing the book. Now I just need to go through and add to it. But I don't know. I'm having trouble putting into words. But the whole story is told.
I like to use an analogy of a painter painting like a really colorful, like very realistic painting, right? Well, they don't start with the paint; they start with a pencil. And they pencil in everything, and then they go through and kind of put a base layer down, and then they put some more color down, and then they go through and add the background, and then they add the foreground, and then they highlight everything. And all those are done in stages. You don't just start with a blank canvas with a paintbrush and just start painting. You have got to layer it down. And so the bare bones outline is the pencil sketching.
Right.
What I did yesterday is basically the laying all the background, doing the base layers, putting in some color here and there, and then the final pass is going through and then really putting in those highlights and those details in the writing. And just really quickly, I see Ginger asking what the onion method is, and we've talked about it before, but it's the onion method is basically starting at the barest minimum that you can for, let's just say, a chapter, and your idea for the chapter is one sentence, and then you take that sentence and you onion that one sentence into, say, 3 or 4 or 5 paragraphs of the entire, what the whole chapter is going to be, and then you take those paragraphs and expand them even further so that each paragraph has 3 or 4 or 5 paragraphs on top of that, dialogue and all of that stuff. And the idea is it's like peeling off an onion one layer at a time, but it's kind of in reverse. You're putting it together.
You're adding those layers each time.
Yeah, that's why I kind of like using the paint method or the paint analogy better than the onion method, because it kind of goes along the same lines. But
I interviewed
it has
someone
worked for me, and
I interviewed someone a couple of weeks ago who described it like this. She said, "Have you ever seen someone chisel a sculpture, and they do one pass where it's a rectangular piece of granite when they begin, and they go through and they rough out the shape of a head, and it obviously doesn't look like anyone, but it's no longer a rectangle, but it starts to resemble a head." And then, you know, they knock off all that, and then they go back and they do another pass, and you start to see there's places where the eyes will be, and the nose is coming out, and lips. It's starting to look like a human, and then another pass brings out more detail, and another pass brings out more detail, and it's just starting at the top, working your way down. Start at the top, work your way down. Each pass adds more and adds more.
Yeah, and I think it saves a lot of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Doug.
No, please, Josh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it saves, well, for me anyway, I know for a fact it saves a lot of time in the long run, and also at the back end of what you're doing. Because if you're you're doing all the right punctuation, you're doing the dialogue tags, or you're doing all the stuff that really takes in aggregate a lot of time. uh if you get to a part of your story that you've done all of this, and you realize that what everything that you wrote doesn't work, you've got to go back and do all that again. And so if you're just like Hank and I are talking about, if you just do that bare bones, or just the really quick kind of um uh Bo, I think it's Bo Hatcher, maybe I pronounced that correctly, says stream of consciousness, you get that whole story out, and then that enables you to see where the problems are in your manuscript before it's done. That way you can go back and fix those issues, and honestly, you don't feel as bad about it, right? Like everybody's precious about their words and all of that, but if it's just no capitalization, no punctuation, no edit, no nothing, then it doesn't matter, because you're going to have to delete that stuff anyway. But that way it enables you to see the story as a whole, and able to break it apart without having to scrap many hours of potential work.
Right.
Yeah. So I love that you guys have been describing this method of approaching writing, because it's not the way that I do it for sure, but it's really cool, and I think a lot of people have been inspired here. What I wanted to add is that to Hank's borrowed analogy about the sculpture, like writing is an art, right? And so when we get a book, we might not view it in the same way that we view like a painting or a sculpture or something along those lines, but it is very much the same. The only thing is, we know that a sculpture has to be chiseled away at, and that a painting has to be sketched and different layers go on it and things dry and then you add more. Same thing like a comic book. Someone drew the outlines and then they filled it in. No one really thinks of a book like, hey, this is a step-by-step process to the finished product. The finished product that you love, like your favorite book that you've ever read, was bad at one point. It was a terrible first draft, at least in comparison to what it became. And so when people are looking at what they have at the end of this month, or what they will be finishing over the next couple months, don't stress out that your dialogue isn't perfect, or that your prose isn't pretty, because that's not the point of this kind of challenge. Whether you're going from an onioning kind of method where you get the bare bones and then you add layers to it, or you're just doing the stream of conscious and then you'll pretty it up later. Like, it's not going to be your best work right now, and that's perfectly fine.
NJ West said you can add layers to cakes, plus filling, icing, drizzle, decoration. Everyone has their own ingredients and style. Everyone's cake comes out different and delicious. If you take this cake analogy and mix it with the onion analogy, you come up with a Doug dark fantasy.
Oh, it's a really, really disgusting cake.
Yeah, it's a gross cake. That's more a Doug horror than a dark fantasy.
Disclaimer, please do not put onions in your cake. Yeah. No one will like it.
Angie
You'll be the bane of Thanksgiving.
I wish I could see the rough drafts of my favorite books. So wouldn't that be something? Then you would get the real perspective of what it takes to make a bestseller or a favorite book.
Right.
I do want to take a couple moments here. Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Sorry, just really quickly on the rough draft comment. It's funny that I've never had a reader ask me to read my drafts until I finished writing my Navarre's Chronicles book this year. And my aunt, who's been a huge fan of mine for years, asked me when the book was going to come out. And I told her, and she's like, I read the first iteration of that and I never got to finish it. So I'm excited to read it. And I said, well, it's got some editing and stuff like that. And she's like, well, can you send me the unedited draft and then send me the edited draft? Because I want to see how it changed from your original story to the changed version to the final project, because I've never seen that happen. And that I never even thought about it that way. And it was interesting to have that question. I think that could be even thinking about it if you had like an author Patreon or something. That might be something you could offer as bonus, like, hey, you want to see an unedited version of this chapter, you know what I mean? Probably not for
Doug,
everybody.
Subscribe.
I think it was you and I that were talking the other day, Doug, about the show I did with Cory Doctorow a few years ago, where he talked about saving all the revisions of his work, because in the age of word processors, we have lost the paper trail of how these works of art evolved during the editing, and he's saving, iteration upon iteration of all of his work, so that one day, even if it's just his kids, can have a record of kind of his creative process and how things changed. And I just love that idea of there's a lot of things I don't want saved for anybody, but I do like the idea of seeing someone else's work and seeing the progression of their work. I don't want anybody to see the progression of mine, but I love the idea that this, and it kind of goes back to this little technique that I've been using, this challenge of striking through instead of changing things, and letting me see what my thought process was. That has been probably the most eye-opening change to my writing in quite some time. Is just leaving these little breadcrumbs for myself, and it has in implementing the onion method, as we call it, or painting or sculpting or whatever. That has been a huge help to track the evolution of my thought process.
Yeah. We have a couple of folks in the chat here saying that no way someone's looking at their rough draft, and that's perfectly fine. Right?
Yeah.
I don't think, well, NJ said here that they may wait until the 4th or 5th draft to let others look at theirs. I tend to do, we talked about revising yesterday when Robert and I chatted on stream, but I tend to do like 2 revisions maybe before I get some outside feedback, and then the 3rd based on that before I let beta readers take a swing at that. Could be more, could be less, but that's tended to be my process this entire time. What about you guys? What does the normal revision process look like for you all?
I kind of revise as I go in some places, but I don't have like a set number of passes that I do. I try to keep it as few passes as possible, just because by the time I'm done with even 2 passes, I'm just sick of looking at the manuscript. And I know that one of my biggest weaknesses is like rewriting things that I've written. And so I try to I go through and I write, let's just say the first draft. I go through and I write the first draft, and then I go look for plot holes, and then I start fixing the plot holes. And then once I've got all the plot holes fixed and I know that the story is more or less correct, then I go through and I do a passive kind of self-editing and looking at things. This is the stage where I may find where I uh, have a character that's not named, and a lot of times, like you can, if I showed you my draft of this project I'm working on now, I have name in all caps, and then I have staff name in all caps, because I don't know what their names are right now, and it didn't matter. But at that second pass is when I go through and if I haven't labeled something, or if I need to check a time, like was it 30 minutes or an hour, if that matters, I check those things and I go through. And then what I normally do is I will mark as I go through the manuscript, I'll mark the chapters that are done. Usually I just put a D in front of the chapter number or at the end of the chapter number. And then I force myself not to go back and look at those, because I know if I go back and look at them, I'll find something that I want to change or adjust or something. And what's that thing? Perfection is the enemy of done. I know that when I'm done with my self edit, I know that I'm not going to catch everything. I'm a horrible editor. That's why I have really good ones. And so when I finish my self editing pass, I mark it, move on. I don't look at it again. And then once the entire manuscript is done, that's when I send it off to the editor, and they'll find whatever they find. Sometimes they'll find story issues, but the majority of my editing comes down to like copy and line editing, where I've spelled a word wrong or used the wrong word or misplaced a comma or whatever, commas are the bane of my writing existence. But after that, after it goes to the editor, I get it back. I go through all the edits changes, and then I send it to my publisher. And I very rarely ever look at it again. I usually do listen to the audiobook when it comes out, and that's when I really start kicking myself in the teeth, because that's when I find the errors that nobody caught.
Yeah.
For instance, there's in like the first 3 pages of the Navarro's Chronicles, I thought I wrote the pilot white knuckled the stick, but what I wrote was he white knocked the stick, and editing didn't catch it, and I didn't catch it, and the narrator just read what was on the page, and so I'm listening to the book, and I go, "White knocked the stick," and I thought, "That's not right," and I opened up the manuscript, and I'm like, "I'm such an idiot. Such an idiot."
That's why Dabble's read to me feature is part of my final draft of editing. Just let it read to you and follow along, and that's a recent thing that I've started doing. But those things jump right out at you that you will just gloss over and never see, because what's the thing we've quoted so many times, that once you see a mistake 3 times, your brain just refuses to acknowledge it ever again until you hear it, and then it jumps out at you.
One of my problems is that my brain will tell me what I knew I was trying to say, not what's on the page.
Right.
And so a lot of times I can look at a sentence and go, "Yep, it's right." And then I listen to it, I go, "That's not right at all." One of the things that many years ago I had Neil Asher on Keystroke Medium. He's a British science fiction author, but he lives in Crete. And what he does when he edits his manuscripts is he goes backwards from the end to the beginning, but he goes like by paragraph, and he goes backwards through the paragraphs, not actually backwards in the lines, but he'll read one paragraph correctly and then go to the paragraph before that, and then go to the paragraph before that. So he's not reading in order. Exactly. It completely throws off how he's reading, because he's not reading the story, he's just reading the words. I haven't managed to pull that off quite, but I could see how that would be really effective.
Yeah. Well, as an editor, I always say one of my favorite parts about being an editor is that I get to read somebody's story and get paid for it, right? I'm fixing it up, but I still get to experience their story. And if you read it backwards like that, that sounds awful, but very effective, right? So
but very effective, right?
Yeah, if you're doing that to one of Doug's books, then your characters just get happier and happier as the story goes on.
True.
It works both ways.
Yeah, everyone's whole and happy at the end.
We had a couple questions come in here. Logio asking, or Logio, when do you bring in outside editors to help with the story? And before I get any thoughts on that one, Mady also asked, wait, how many times are we supposed to be revising and rewriting? I had sort of been hoping I could be ready for beta readers after like draft 2. And we can answer those questions, but I do want to take this time to shamelessly plug something that we announced yesterday. Robert and I announced is that on Saturday, the big reward that everybody is going to get for succeeding at Nano, totally free, for succeeding at the 60-day novel challenge, NaNoWriMo, or just being an awesome writer that you are, we're releasing 2 free courses. And one of them is what to do with a nano draft. And it goes over both of those questions in great detail. The only reason I hesitate to answer them here is because we do have a couple more things to get through, and those can be pretty open-ended questions. So if we have time at the end, we can circle back to those. But otherwise, don't worry, you're getting a free multi-hour resource to answer those questions in depth, Logio and Mady. Okay, so I do want to know, so we know where we're at with your books right now, and Hank, you are just about done. Then I want to say, like, the draft itself, the story, is it complete? Do you still have another chapter or 2 to write?
No, I'm
done.
I'm complete.
Excellent.
It's not in its finished stage, obviously, but it's complete. Beginning. Excellent. It has a beginning, middle, and end.
Awesome. And Josh, you were aiming for something like 80 to 100,000 words, like in total, not this month, correct?
Yeah, it's probably going to be 100,000 words.
Okay.
And so, I mean, technically, I'm only like 30% into the book.
Mhm.
But over the last week, and I mentioned last week, I worked through a lot of the major points that are kind of midway and then at the end. So it's I mean, it won't be done. And I'm plowing through this for this challenge, and then as soon as Friday hits, and I'm committed to hitting the 50,000 before the end of the challenge, even if it's midnight on Friday because we have Thanksgiving on Thursday. But as soon as Friday hits or Saturday hits, then I've got to transition back over to weaponized and set this book aside for a while. But yeah, I think about 30% total of the book kind of drafted so far. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess that answers my next question, which would be what's next for the book. So yours is just going to hang out while you work on the book that pays the bill. That's fine. That's cool. I get
Yeah,
it.
right. Well, and that book's pretty close. If I can maintain the word counts I've been doing for the challenge, I'll have that book done in a couple of weeks, and then I just have half of the second book and then all of the third book to write. So I should be back on this thriller book probably by the end of spring next year.
Excellent. And Hank, what is next for it's Crossroad Blues? Is that the book?
Crossroad Blues.
Yeah.
I am going to continue to work through this weekend on it, and then when November is over, uh, and I'm not finished onioning it the way that I want to, but I'm going to put it on pause for a little bit, and I have edits that came back on my science fiction book that's coming out with Athon next week, and I'm going to get through those edits first, and I've got a couple of chapters I'm going to rewrite because I wrote this book in a very different way than I'm currently writing, and my writing has evolved since I started on that book, and so I've got some things I'm going to rewrite, and hopefully I've never been able to set a project aside for a few weeks and then come back to it. Like we always talk about. That's
Mhm.
kind of best case scenario. But
Yep.
this is going to kind of force me to do that. So then when I come back to Crossroad Blues, I'm hoping that initial creative spark will be rekindled, and those second and third passes will go quickly, and will feel exciting again. From just taking some time away. So that's what I'm planning to do.
Excellent. For my own, I'm also at about 35,000 words. I'm quite far behind, and so like Josh, I'm hoping to be done by Saturday. It'll help tomorrow. Just as a little
Yeah,
shameless plug, we're doing our all-day writing marathon tomorrow, so
9
I'll kick
hours.
that off at 9 a.m. Eastern. I'll be doing a handful of sprints. Then Hank, you'll come on at 10. Robert will come on at 11. Then I'm back on at noon, and we'll just keep cycling and cycling and get a silly amount of words written.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping for that to catch that up. My concern, actually, I think once I'm done this month, assuming the novella is done, because I am writing for that novella length, I think I want to add another scene or two. I feel like there's a little bit of meat missing from in between, like my second and third act. So I might do that, but otherwise, as it stands, I'm almost a little bit concerned that I'm only going to reach like 48,000 words with the current structure and not that 50,000. So I don't know what I'll write for the other 2,000. But I'll find something. I got to hit that number. I need to.
Deb,
And
do I hear you saying that you're not confident you can be verbose enough?
okay, that's not the issue. The chapters are verbose. It's already longer than I think than I wanted the novella to be. So don't worry about that, Hank.
Gotcha.
Um,
Okay.
but after that, I'm also going to pivot back to the book that I was getting into the third act in October. Hopefully, finish that by the end of December, maybe mid-January. And by the time I'm ready to take a break on that, I can circle back to this one and start some revisions. That's my plan. And then, next year, I want to do for Dabble Premium a case study on email marketing and email list building using this novella as a lead magnet for it. So that's going to be
great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that quite a bit. Okay, another question for you gentlemen. Did you have, and I think I know the answer for Hank for this one, but did you have any big revelations or aha moments or discoveries during this challenge?
Yes. But if Hank wants to go first, I can.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. I mean, my writing process has evolved, and I think I've talked about that. Just the figuring out, like I said earlier, that how I can tell an entire book in a truncated period of time, and it doesn't have to be the final form that it's going to be. I think just shifting the way I think about forming that story, and like Josh kind of described earlier, that's a really advanced outline, if you want to look at it that way. So kind of that realization is my big aha moment for this month, and it's been a gradual realization, but I'm really liking where my writing has kind of evolved or grown to at this point.
Excellent. Josh, what about you?
I actually am really excited to talk about this piece of it, because I had this. I think it was actually after our show last week, or maybe I thought about it during the show and didn't get a chance to say it. But we'd been talking about, on one of the shows, we talked about subplotting, and I know a lot. We've talked about writing the ending if you're stuck in the middle, and we've talked a lot about that over the last several weeks. And one of the things that struck me about the writing the scenes that you want to write and then incorporating subplots is that sometimes subplots don't have to involve the characters in the book technically. And what I mean by that is there can be events happening in your world that are going on in the same area that your characters are at, but they're not directly affecting your character. Um, and that can add a lot of color and a lot of depth to your books. And those kind of subplots, probably not the right word, but those elements of the story can really enable you to touch on many different things. And so I was trying to figure out how I was going to write a couple of sequences, and actually, it turned out to be the sequence that I wrote yesterday. Um, I was trying to figure out how am I going to put these characters together, and then also how am I going to get to the amount of words that I need to hit the goal that I wanted for the book, because I was running out of plot, if you want to call it that. And I know that I talked on the first episode, or one of the first episodes, about kind of mapping it out and going, I need 50 chapters, and the ending is going to start at like 35, chapter 35, and it's going to run to chapter 48 and all of that. And I do that just so I can see structurally where I need to put things at, but I wasn't hitting that. I was having trouble getting to that chapter 35 mark, and I didn't have anything else to put in there. And so I was like stressing about it for a couple of days, going, how am I going to get to that mark, because I don't have anything else here. And so what happened is the sequence that I ended up writing yesterday is in the plot grid. It's one card, and it's uh, the team finds this gang member, and that was it. I envisioned the gang member maybe talking to one of the local guys. That kind of led me to think, okay, this guy's an informant, but nobody knows he's an informant. Um, but when I initially was like plotting, I wasn't thinking in terms of where I was going to set it. I just thought, they're on a street corner. They see him talking to this guy. They grab him, they throw him in the van, and they go. And I was like, that's not very interesting. I need something else. And so I started looking at um, I started looking at the city and trying to figure out what I could do, and I found this really cool plaza in Concepcion that's it's got a fountain in the middle, and it's like a block wide, and there's a whole bunch of streets that are only available for pedestrians, and it's kind of a big logistical nightmare. And I thought, what if this is going on during an election and there's a rally at this uh, plaza, and that would put thousands of people potentially at this plaza, and it would make their job a lot harder to get
Mm,
this guy. And so that's where it kind of come into the subplot kind of slash element of this is I started seeding in things about the election through all
Mm.
of the other chapters, just little tidbits, like little people talking about it here and there. And then this rally is kind of a center point for this uh, takedown to happen. And so instead of them just driving up and throwing this guy in a van, they have to navigate through the crowd. They've got to find the guy. They lose the guy. They've got to track him. And then I threw in the uh, the local investigator, and she spots them, and she starts tracking them. And now they have to follow the guy, but they've also got to lose her. And they end up losing the guy in a car, and then they find him again. And so it went from being one card in one chapter to being like my stream of consciousness word count for that chapter is almost 4,000 words. But when I add all the color to that, it's probably going to be double or triple that. So now instead of just having one chapter for that event, it's definitely going to be 3 or 4 or 5, which definitely gets me closer to that 35, 36 chapter mark so I can
yeah.
start the ending. Um, but it was also I started thinking about that last week and thinking, how can I incorporate different things into the manuscript to make it more interesting and also give me more things to play with and a cool set piece, because that, cool set pieces in any story is I think important. You don't want to have a what I call the white space syndrome, where you're just reading words on a book and you can't visualize where they're at, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Sometimes you get that a lot sometimes in science fiction, where they're doing, like, they're on spaceships or everything else like that. And I really like to paint like really cool set pieces that are memorable. And in this case, you can actually go and see the plaza. You can see the tree where these people are standing next to. You can follow them through the streets as they're following this guy and see what they're seeing, which I think is interesting. I've never been able to do that before. Um, but that changed a lot of how my perception of this project in terms of writing it just through our conversation, because I was able to kind of just sit back and think, oh, I can add this element and this element and this kind of subplot ish thing that really the election doesn't affect them really, but it does affect some of the events in the story, and it affects um, that the investigators asking for backup, but all the officers that are there are working security. They can't leave their posts. And so you create a lot of tension there. And she's asking for help. And the guys are like, do you know for a fact that these guys are spies? And she's like, no. And they're like, can't help you. And so there's it adds some context and a lot of like real tension to the scene that I didn't have before. And that was really interesting.
Excellent.
And
I kind of
I'm
had.
sorry for that long ramble thing.
We're here to ramble. That's
Literally.
I think I mentioned last show or the show before, maybe I had a similar sort of realization or revelation but mine was more about how my protagonist is actually going to defeat the antagonist in the final battle. And it's I realize I had them going through a subway tunnel in this city that is burning down around them, but the electricity is still running. And so we find out, like, I looked into like the third rail of subway and train systems, the electrified one that they tell you not to
Right.
touch when you go down there.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, I want to play with this maybe, but not just have it be there. So I had it that my main characters are angels, right? They're the warriors that have these swords and shields and spears that were forged not of this earth. And so I had it so that they're like divine steel, interacts differently with the electricity, and it just makes this big shower of sparks and arcs and whatnot. And it turns out, I didn't plan this, but my antagonist has all of this iron fused into her body. I gotta, I can't go into too much detail, but there's a lot of metal sticking out from her. And then I thought to myself, okay, I need to get my antagonist somehow near this third rail, and then bring in my hero's sword and just let electricity do its thing. Right. So that's the revelation I had to how I'm going to finish this climactic battle, because my antagonist, I'm building her up as this thing that is way too strong for any of my characters to handle. So I need to get a little creative with it. And that was my big revelation. So starting to feed that in a little bit more. It was fun. I love those aha moments. Those little things where it's like, oh, I wrote this seemingly out of nowhere, and it's just fun. Like, I can make use of this in the story. So, yeah. All right, one more question for you gents. What was the biggest obstacle or road bump during the 60-day novel challenge? And I'm going to answer first, if you don't mind. And
go ahead.
To call it an obstacle sounds, not great, but like when I went to Jamaica, so went on vacation for my brother's wedding, had a great time. I'm not saying it was a bad thing. I did not get a lot of writing done when I was
suffering for your art, weren't you?
Really, really suffering, right? But the Wi-Fi was awful, and I was busy. I was having a good time, and that had, not only was it less words written during those days, there were some days where it was like 5 or 50 words jotted down on my phone. But then the ripple effect afterwards, where I'm just tired from coming back from vacation, or I'm dreaming of being back on vacation, or I just don't have the momentum of writing for, a whole week in a row now. That had a bigger effect than I thought it would, which is why I'm such an advocate for no 0 days, because there was real potential for there to be 10 plus days of 0 if I didn't stick to that. And I'd be even farther behind than I am now. What about you guys? Josh, your bronchitis might be up there. But
that was it. I mean, that laid me out. If not for that, I think I would have had, I definitely would have still been kind of even on schedule. But that definitely knocked me back. I had already not planned on writing on the weekends. But I did do a little bit on the weekends. But I mean, that was it. The bronchitis really knocked me down for about a week almost, and then I still had all my Athon work and stuff that I had to do on top of that, and there's always something, right? There's always life happens, and you've just got to keep on pressing on, and oh well, and also the video that I made that took like a whole day too. That took like a whole half a day of recording and all of that. It was for a good cause. So, but mostly it was the bronchitis.
Yeah, the bronchitis.
I think it's tough to say which is harder for someone, an all-inclusive resort or an infection.
I mean, definitely the all-inclusive resort.
Yeah.
I mean, your burdens are many, sir. I'm sorry that you had to go through that.
Resorts, infectious disease, same, right?
Hank, what about you?
Well, at the risk of sounding like that guy,
you're already there, dude. You're already there.
I know. So I'm just gonna go for it. I had a really good month. And I attribute all of it to having having the life of Riley for a writer at this point. And it is not lost on me how fortunate I am and have been this month, because I work for a company that we have daily writing sprints. So, and yeah, at least this month. But I knew from years past of doing NaNoWriMo before that everyone starts with great intentions, and you have a tendency to run out of steam by about that second week. I planned ahead for that, and because of the writing sprints, and because I have a family who um, has known for the last decade that November is NaNoWriMo month, and so I have I have trained them, to expect, this is coming up, and my 4 oldest kids are all married and have kids and have all moved on, and there's just not a whole lot of shenanigans at my house at odd hours. I was able to just get a lot of writing in, and yes, I went to Vegas, for, like, a 48-hour wild, super fast turnaround trip, but I got some writing done on the plane even, thanks to my little, my little portable writing kit, and, I didn't have a lot of friction, and I got I'm super glad that I did, because we have some family issues that have come up with our newest grandkid that's in the hospital right now, and so there's a lot of going back and forth right now, and I'm super happy that I got those words in ahead of time, and I don't feel torn, so that I can be present where I need to be present. Um, so it hasn't always been that way for me. I've had plenty of years where I struggled to get it. Um, but it only took me 10 years of practice to get myself prepared. But it's been a great experience this year, and I attribute it to so many ways that, that I'm just fortunate that to be able to do that. But that's where I am.
Yeah. All
Both
right,
of you guys got to go on like really cool trips I didn't get the memo that we got to go on cool trips during this event. And so maybe next time you guys could give me like a little heads up so I could also go to some cool place. Because
Well,
I just
I'll
went
let
to
you
the
know.
doctor's office and it was not nearly as cool as Vegas, although I was rolling the dice.
right.
And
Anytime you go to the doctor's office, you are.
the
When I
meds
went to
made me
Vegas,
feel like I was drunk. So like I kind of like
well, Jacob and I shared a hotel room, and we told Dabble secrets all night long. So
nice.
that was
Nice.
I don't know if you said it, Hank, but Hank got to go to Author Nation, or went to represent Dabble at Author
yeah,
Nation in Vegas, formerly 20 books to 50K,
yeah,
I believe. So
incredible experience. Highly recommend it.
yeah, and if anyone's there next year, swing by and see the Dabble booth. We'll be there. Cool. So with that said, and I want to keep this show around an hour maybe, but yesterday when I chatted with Robert. Robert is a fair. I think it was at 25,000 words by the end of the day. So it's not feasible to get in those extra 25,000 words in 4 days when it's your first book and you're working this full-time job and has a newborn. So we decided to push his deadline out to the middle of February, and that got him to a daily goal of 650-ish words, taking into account he's going to be at Brandon Sanderson's convention next month. The Christmas and New Year's are in there, general days off that we threw at the end for things that happen. So that is, if you're super behind because of something that happened, my go-to is to say push the deadline back to make it feasible so that you don't burn yourself out, you don't grow to
Right.
hate the project. Sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes you have a deadline, you have to do it. But when you guys get behind in a writing project, whether that deadline is self-imposed or imposed by somebody else, what is your kind of go-to strategy to get back on track or to keep up the momentum?
I hate deadlines. Deadlines terrify me. I if I got a deadline, my word count just completely plummets. I can't handle them.
Interesting.
I've had a couple of them, and I get so focused on the end point, and my brain is like, "You need these 100,000 words tomorrow," even though the
Mhm.
deadline's like 2 months away. I get fixated on that, and I can't push through it. So I don't have deadlines anymore. I don't work that well that way, except for this challenge, which is a little different because it's a deadline, but the story doesn't have to be done, and so it's a
Right.
very like kind of different thing in my head. But I whether I'm behind or not, I just keep honestly trying to push forward and do the best work that I can. And uh, on the one deadline that I did have, I ended up having to scrap a whole bunch of stuff that I wanted to do with the book because I didn't have enough time to get it all written. So I just had to throw out. I think I threw out two plot threads that I thought I envisioned kind of wrapping up in a really cool, like kind of dramatic way, and then I ended up ending with like a 2 sentence dialogue deal where they were like, "Yeah, we got the gold back," and then and um, but deadline, they're crushing to me, man. I don't know how people ugh, can't do it.
Well, that's good advice though. If you are behind where you kind of want to be, don't stress about the deadline then.
Yeah,
If
for
it
sure.
stresses you out, don't. Hank, what about you?
I tend to agree with Josh. Deadlines, are can be soul crushing, and especially if you have all of these hopes and expectations wrapped up in that, and then you miss those deadlines, and then you feel like everything you've been working for in your author life is just unraveling, and then all of a sudden you find yourself, face first in a tub of Haagen-Dazs, and it all goes sideways. Um, um,
Amazing.
that was the most
Amazing, man.
family friendly thing I could come up with. Yeah, I agree with Josh. Yeah, I have goals. I have a calendar of projects that I'm working on, and I try to make real expectations and goals for myself if I want to keep the schedule that I'm working on. But at the end of the day, if I miss that schedule, um, I don't beat myself up about it, and I just adjust where I can. Um, you know, and this is probably another conversation for another show, but I think you and I have talked about it, Doug, and I know that Jacob and I were talking about it in Vegas, that the blessing of a day job. People look down. People are always trying to put too much expectation on their author career. And if you're a full-time author and that's your only source of income, congratulations, that's amazing, and I'm all for you. I don't mean to denigrate that at all. But if you're at a place where you can write for the enjoyment of it and also make money at it, I don't think anybody's expecting to not make money at this thing that takes up such a big chunk of your life. But if you don't put all of your expectation on that, um, you can enjoy it a whole lot more, in my experience. So, just keeping things in their correct place in life. You've got family over here that's important, and you have to feed and water that garden, or it doesn't uh grow correctly. And then you've got your day job, and you've got to give it the appropriate attention so that it whatever. And then your author life, keeping everything in perspective is a big thing for me, and not allowing one thing to be more than it needs to be. It just really, and it took me several years to get that perspective, and to uh not look down on this thing in my life because it's not uh performing the way I wish it would. And when you kind of remove those unreal expectations, it really brings the joy of things back for you.
No, I want to second that because I've had the same realization, and I know I'm personal friends with several authors that's all they do is
Yeah.
write books, and they make a very good living on writing their books. But some of those same authors that I know, um, the stress eats at them
Yes.
horribly, and there are um days where they're literally telling me, I don't know if I'm going to be able to feed my family if this book doesn't do what the other book does. And I might have to go get a job. And so, like Hank, I've got a, a, a day job. It's not a full-time job, but it does pay the bills the way I need it to. And I can write what I want to write, and I don't have to stress about the book not selling. And just for
Right.
context, I wrote a book that sold extremely well, was extremely well reviewed and received. It got nominated for the Dragon Award. It was it was a breakthrough for me.
Yeah.
And then the 5 books that I wrote after that did almost absolutely nothing. And it's having that having that fallback of a day job, even if you are successful, is it takes a lot of that stress off, because that stress can be extremely debilitating in terms of
Yep.
creativity, because then your mind is always focusing on that, and all of that mental energy that you want to be putting into your manuscript is just wasted on that stress and worrying about it. And also, like you said, like it is kind of a weird thing that people look at writers, and the first thing they ask is, "Are you a full-time writer?" And
Right.
like most traditional published authors are not full-time writers.
Yeah.
And even the ones that you think are big names don't make that much money.
Yeah.
And writing is one of the only hobbies that you can make money on and
Yeah.
enjoy. You could like flying RC airplanes and be sinking thousands of dollars into RC airplanes, and you're likely never going to make any money off of
Right.
that, right?
You'll never get a
Um,
return on that.
you'll never get a return on it. And yeah, there's money involved in writing with edits and all of that stuff. And every author's obviously got their own path, but for something that you enjoy doing, that you can just sit down in front of a computer for a couple hours a day because that's what you enjoy doing, and potentially make a couple $100, you pay your phone bill. I mean, on writing, Stephen King said, if you make enough money to pay your phone bill, you are a professional writer. Doesn't
Right.
matter if you're full time or not. And if you can keep your job, write a best-selling book, all that money's bonus,
Yeah.
right? Like, you don't like it. It's just a weird kind of mentality for a lot of people, that they don't put any credence in you unless that's all you do is you're a
Right.
writer.
Well, I
So I 100% side with Hank on that.
I interviewed Brandon Sanderson a few years ago, and he told me that he wrote 13 books before he published his first one, and and uh, and he said, and if I had never broken into the publishing industry, I would have still been writing books. He said, when I died, my kids would have inherited a house that had novels stuffed in every closet, everywhere, because I was going to write books, whether anyone wanted to publish them and whether anyone wanted to buy them. I was going to write books.
Yep.
And he said, I have a number of friends who like to go play basketball at the YMCA, and nobody asked them, well, when are the Lakers going to draft you? They just do
Right.
it because it's fun. And
Right.
how come writing is the one thing that we tell people, well, if you're not publishing and making 6 figures, then you're not legit. Like
100%.
why do we even have that frame of reference? That's so bizarre, that we
Mhm.
put this thing on this part of our life that's so fulfilling in so many ways. It doesn't have to pay any bills. If it, if it is an outlet for you and it allows you to, there's so many things that writing does for you, and paying bills doesn't have to be any of them.
One of the realizations that I had, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, but one of the
Yeah.
realizations I had a couple of years ago was um, that I wish that more people looked at writing the way that people look at um, local cover bands that
Yes.
play at bars in your town, right?
Yep.
Because those cover bands, maybe they make a couple $100 a gig, but they all have full-time jobs. But
Yep.
the thing is they love performing, they love singing, they're good at it, and people enjoy going to even if it's only a couple hundred people enjoy going to those cover bands. And maybe they play on a Thursday night here or a Friday night there. They're not going on a world tour. They're not like going on whatever MTV and having music, but they're doing what they really, really, really enjoy.
Yep.
And I think if a lot of people kind of made that same mental connection to authors for the most part, they would see, oh yeah, that cover band, great, read a book, absolutely.
I've always heard it said that writing pays about as well as vagrancy.
I mean, that's true. That's very true. That's very
I
true.
love that.
I want to third what you gentlemen have been saying, because Hank's heard this before, but my first book went from like idea to published book in like 4 or 5 years. My second book went from idea to published book in 2 years. And then the next 3 books that I co-authored, we ideated, we brainstormed and published in the span of 5 months, right? So I went from zero. I went from doing this occasionally in my spare time with the first book to doing a faster pace than what we've been doing this month for the 3 books that I helped co-author. And don't get me wrong, those books, got me to Jamaica. They paid for that vacation and then some. They got me a bestseller status and #1 new release status on all of them. So like it was a good experience, but it's also the experience that burned me out for 6 months, and then I didn't write a single word, and I was really upset about that. So I don't want people thinking that commercial writing, full-time writing is like the only way to go, and you should catapult yourself to that as soon as possible. I love this idea of writing because you love it, and then if possible, go like part-time on your day job and part-time on writing. Honestly, I think that's like the sweet spot for me. That would be ideal one day.
Yeah.
So, and if Jacob's still in the chat, one day being in the distant future. I love my job.
My advice when I went full time, my whole goal was to replace my cop salary. But in hindsight, my advice would be don't quit your day job until you're making at least double or more from your books on a consistent basis, because that number could very easily drop very significantly if you have a book that doesn't do well. But if you're making double, at least you can cover your expenses and all of that, and it makes for an easier transition. And I know that's kind of a it's a big dream, and it's a lot of money for a lot of people, but
well, and also if you're indie publishing, and we've seen this happen so many times over the last 10 years, is that Amazon changes something about their algorithm, or
sure.
they restructure Kindle Unlimited, and 1 month you're earning $7,000, and the next month you earn 50, and you're like, holy moly, what's going on? And then it invariably gets fixed, but sometimes it takes 2 or 3 months, and everything is completely thrown off. And if you're depending hard on that, that you just have to take into account all those things, the elasticity of the way the whole machine is, and just prepare for it, just like every other aspect of your life. Just
those algorithms are brutal, man. We've had a couple of releases from some of our bigger name authors for Athon, and it just so happened that on the day of their release, the whatever the computer system that runs the algorithm and that pushes all of the stuff, it went down, and it was down for several days. And because it was down, the rankings didn't update and the book didn't push. And so it got no visibility in the window that we needed the visibility through. Now it still did reasonably well, but it did significantly less than it should have done if the computer's algorithm and all of that was doing what it needs to do. Sometimes it's out of your hands. It could be the best book ever, and the internet goes down, and and then you're out of luck. So
yeah. Hey, I want to pop this question up real quick, Doug. Black Blade said, do you think it's better to have a first book that does really well with all the pressure that comes with it, with then writing the second, or a book that does just passingly well? I can think of a couple of good examples.
I can
That
think of one really good friend of the show for that first example. That's Christopher Paolini.
Christopher Paolini, yeah.
Yeah.
You've got well, yeah, Paolini is a case unto himself,
Yeah.
because he was
He was a
15
kid.
years old when he
Yeah.
wrote that first book, and hormones played into all that, and but Hugh Howey had been writing for a number of years before Wool came out. He had an entire series. It was completed, the Molly Fide series, that was 4 or 5, maybe 6 books. I can't remember now. So he had those. He had a couple of other books in his back catalog. Uh, and he talked about how thankful he was that he had these books under his belt. Number one, because that was all that time that he was woodshedding, getting better at his craft, so that by the time the idea for Wool came to him, he had advanced as an author to the point that he could tell that story. So that's number one. But then he also had items in his back catalog that when people discovered him, they had more of his stuff they could go buy while they waited for him to write the follow up in the Silo series. And so that is always beneficial. And we've seen a number of authors. Um, uh, Ernie Klein comes to mind when he wrote Ready Player One. That it was the first book he'd ever written, and I've talked to him about this. We're not just throwing him under the bus. These are things that he has said, that it was such a success that everyone was clamoring for a follow up from it. And he wrote a book that was a good book,
It's a
Armada.
good book.
It's a
Armada,
good
yeah.
book. It's not. It doesn't break any new ground. I think there are a number of movies from the '80s that you could arguably say it was at least an analog of, if not a direct ripoff.
Right.
That's kind of harsh, but
Yeah.
but it's the fact it was a safe book to write. It was a good book, but it was a safe book to write. And I think that came from him having this massive breakout success and just a little bit of fear of following that up or under a time crunch, so that he didn't allow the same creative process that he went through with the first one wasn't allowed to happen in the second one because there was all this pressure. So I think there's a lot of examples that you can explore of. I think it's always better to have some things under your belt before before you have breakout success. You don't always get to choose that, but if you can, I think it's better. And we talk on the podcast a lot about the gift of anonymity, and that's Rothfuss syndrome. Absolutely. That the gift of anonymity, when no one knows you and no one knows to expect anything from you, you'll never get that time back, because once you publish and people start to love your work, that brings a whole other level of stress, and your creative process changes, and everything. So
Well, and kind of in that same vein of having success in your first book, whereas you could have like a Rothfuss where now I don't know what his deal is, but he can't write the last book or whatever else is going on with that. Or you have the Ernie Klein's Ready
yeah,
Player One. But also, I think the biggest example of that is of what you're talking about is J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter,
right,
because she can't write under J.K. Rowling anymore. She has to write under her pen name, and her pen name does really well. And of course, everybody knows that it's her pen name, but they didn't when she wrote,
right.
because Harry
Robert
Potter was
Galbraith,
so big. Yeah, Harry Potter was so big, they didn't want anything else from her. They
right,
literally would get super mad if she talked about writing a different kind of book or a different genre, different story or whatever. All they wanted was Harry Potter. And it's kind of an outlier because everyone, she doesn't have to write anymore, right?
yeah,
And if you have that kind of a success, then you don't have to. But if you want to, sometimes there are significant challenges that come with having that big breakout success, because then no one wants anything else, even if you have a whole bunch of different stories to tell.
yeah,
And I think, if you look at Stephen King didn't have like huge breakout successes with any of his first dozen books. They were all really good books. They all sold relatively well, but there wasn't any like major big wow, like, oh my God, everybody's reading this book. And so he got to do like tons and tons and tons of things, different genres and different stories. Got to write The Dark Tower and all of that. And I think having some success, but not a a dump truck full of money being dropped on your driveway, is good. But also it allows you to grow as an author and get better. And uh, I would much well, I've had several middling successes, but I like that. I like being able to kind of sit back and change my style up and do different things. I'm not locked into one story in one universe, because a lot of people get stuck into that, and then next thing you know, you're writing 12 books or 20 books in a series, and you're like, I'm really done with this series, but all the people want, and you can't write anything else.
Yeah. Well, Terry Brooks of Shannara fame, I think he published his 4th book, and those books are modern classics at this point. And before he quit his day job, he was still practicing law 4 books deep into a massive fantasy series that spanned 3-4 decades now at this point.
Yeah,
and
Well, that circles us back to what we were talking about at the top of the show, where people think that great books just pop out as great books. Great authors don't just pop out as great authors.
Right.
They have careers, and they grow. They become better writers than what their first book is representative of, even in its polished form. So
I very rarely recommend people to read my very first published book. Usually I'm like, don't read that. If you read that, just know that was a few years ago, man.
I would love to do a survey of indie authors to find out how many people unpublished their first book. Let's pretend that never existed.
Yeah.
All right. And on that note, we've gone a bit over the hour mark, but we thank everyone for joining us. Is there anything that either of you want to add on this, our final 60-day novel challenge, at least for this year? Anything you want to add?
I saw a question pop up from Jane as someone started. Hank, do you have any idea of what percentage of your book is needed for the gaps? And that's back when we were talking about the. I think I'm obviously just over 50,000 words now. I believe each chapter probably needs about another 1,000 words. Each chapter is roughly about 1,600 words from the way I've been doing it. So it's probably going to come in 80 to 90,000 words. So I'm probably going to go back through and add 1,000 to 1,200 words per chapter. That's what I'm thinking. I'll let you know in January when I'm back at it. But that's what I'm thinking.
And Josh, anything from you?
Well,
other than how grateful you are to have shared all this time with Hank and I.
Oh yeah, no, I love hanging out with you guys. No, seriously, I really do appreciate the invite to be able to participate with you guys and do these shows and do the challenge and speak to everybody else. And thank you everybody for watching and asking great questions that really kind of facilitated our conversations instead of us just kind of looking at the camera and waxing eloquently about nothing for hours and hours. But I do appreciate the opportunity to hang out with you guys, and it pushed me to work on this thriller faster than I would normally have been able to pull it off, and I just really enjoyed the time. I'm kind of sad that it's over now.
Yeah, it didn't really kind of hit me until I said, okay, this is the last show, we're wrapping up now.
Right.
We do really appreciate you joining us, Josh. You have made this a great series of shows, a great challenge, and we appreciate everyone who has joined us in the shows in the Storycraft Cafe. I know over in the cafe we have something like 800 people registered for this challenge, participating and sharing their work and whatnot. And so I do want to share in the cafe, you can, if you're part of the 60-day novel challenge, grab your coupon for 20% off a year of Dabble. But if you hit that 50,000 word mark before November 30th, I'm dropping a link in the chat or in the comments where you can submit your email, fill out the form there, and that will get you a 50% off coupon for a year of Dabble if you hit that 50,000 word mark. And if you're watching this after, we'll be sure to throw this into the notes or the description underneath the video.
Yeah.
Or you can head on over to the Storycraft Cafe and the community there to fill out the form. But other than that, I mean, very exciting. I hope everyone gets their 50% off. Go ahead, you put in the hard work. You've earned it. That's a big reward, and you've definitely put in the work to earn it. So thank you all for joining us. We do have some more events coming up this week to wrap up November. The 9-hour writing marathon tomorrow starts at 9 a.m. Eastern time. Then on Thursday, whilst my American colleagues are celebrating Thanksgiving, I will be hosting the writing sprints at 12:30 p.m. Eastern time. And then on Friday, 12:30 again for writing sprints. And then at 2 p.m., I'll be hosting a wrap-up show to sign off on NaNoWriMo on the 60-day novel challenge, talk about some Black Friday deals, mayhaps, and then what's coming next. So thank you for joining us. We'll hopefully see you again later this week, and have a good time writing. Bye, everyone.
See you.